We're calling the 911 Advisory Board meeting to order. Welcome to the State 911 Advisory Board meeting. I'd like to advise everybody that the meeting is being webcast as well as being recorded. So first, roll call. Sheriff Bonner. Chief Howland.
Here.
Sheriff Maley.
Here.
Charles Burdan.
Here.
Chief Spiegel.
Here.
Charles Cullen.
Here.
Jamie Young.
Here.
Chief Trowerneck.
Here.
Chief Langston.
Here.
Leslie Wilson.
Here.
We have a quorum, so the meeting will get started. Our first order of business is our closed session. So the State 911 Advisory Board specifies specifics regarding outage will now convene in the closed session by members of the board pursuant to Bagley-King Act and Government Code Section 11126, subsection C, subsection 18A. So do we have a motion to close the session and review the outage report?
I'll move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, thank you. We will go to the back room and do our closed session, and then we will call the meeting back to order and begin the rest of our agenda. Thank you. Get started. Okay, we're calling the meeting back to order. Thank you. Okay, our next order of business is the approval of the minutes of the August 2014 meeting minutes. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? If not, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All approved? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes passed as written. We now move on to unfinished business. First up is the legislative updates from the 911 Advisory Board. Does anybody have legislative updates to discuss? Okay, if not, we will move to the next item, which is wireless routing. Bill Anderson.
And yesterday, we did have a discussion on wireless routing through the LRPC. That was assigned to the LRPC to look at wireless routing. So we had the discussion.
Okay, so will you address that during the LRPC?
Sure, I can give the report.
Okay.
So I was really going to kind of defer to Chris on that one because we had actually discussed it and came up with some potential solutions to look at wireless routing and kind of catch it as early as possible.
Okay.
Can I give that portion now?
Sure.
Discussion on it?
That would be absolutely fine.
The way the LRPC sort of took this topic is we sort of split it into two. One being the FCC item, so we'll get to that. And then the other was more, I think, the question that came up about since the RED project and what that provided us, what the information that provided PSAPs, what's the process for sectors being routed? So let me give that to you because as we found out yesterday, a lot of us weren't aware of some of the tools that are available. And Michelle's here, so Michelle, if I speak out of turn, let me know, because obviously she's very familiar with this process, and her team are involved. So when there is a new tower or maintenance on a tower that causes a need for the sectors to be reevaluated, the wireless service providers provide a routing sheet, and that goes to CHP and the appropriate county coordinator. And it asks them to take a look and then within 15 days provide a response. Typically, Michelle and her team receive a recommendation from the county coordinator on where those sectors should be routed. CHP reviews that. If they agree, then it's routed back to the vendor. If there isn't agreement, then there's further discussion. There is an escalation process in place where they can involve the local CHP office and or Michelle's commander. And as she said, nothing has needed to go beyond that. All parties get together and ultimately come to a resolution. There are some counties that defer to CHP, so they prefer either because they don't have the staff time or because they don't want to. They don't provide a recommendation, and they've told Michelle, you know, we'll ask you to provide a recommendation, so they do that in some cases. And then whether the local PSAP is consulted by the or consulted at all in that process is really up to the individual county coordinators. So if you're a PSAP manager and you're not being included on these, it's really up to you to reach out to your county coordinator and make it known that you want to be included. I think that's fair, personally. So the question came up, once that initial routing is determined, is there a way to go back and take a look at the sector, which was kind of a byproduct of the RED project. It allowed us to do that. And the answer is yes. There is an ECATS report where you can look at transfers, calls that are transferred. You can look at that by sector and by carrier. So a PSAP manager, county coordinator, CHP can run that report to help determine. So what we did yesterday is we asked the CCTF to take this topic, have a discussion at their December conference call, right? At their December conference call, so that we can identify going forward a way for that to, we want to ensure that that's going to occur. We don't want to just leave it up to chance. We would like to see some follow-up occur. So CCTF will report back to the LRPC on a plan for kind of going forward. One of the options discussed was working with ECATS and working with the state 911 branch to perhaps set that report up so that it gets run automatically, gets routed to either PSAP managers, the county coordinators, and or CHP. So a lot of discussion. Anything that I'm missing on that topic, you guys?
Yeah, I think one of the things we kind of all agreed was in looking and identifying routing issues, it kind of becomes a grassroots type effort from the PSAP up, where we're actually notifying abnormalities in too many transfers coming through, or the PSAP can actually transfer where there's issues. We can then take the information, as Chris was speaking of, and dig deeper into it to see if there has, you know, why the transfers were occurring and what was causing that, and then go through the process. Because in the end, we're still governed by CPUC code. So the decision to make a change in routing is really going to be based on code, regardless of what we do ahead of that. So being able to have the PSAPs identify potential issues, then we think we can move forward very well on that.
Questions from the board? I have this really cool little thing on mine. I have 3 people queued up, but I don't know what the number is.
I think I'm D8.
Okay. Go for it, Charlie.
And I think one of the other things we discussed is there is the capability of, when you run these reports, setting a threshold so that if a certain percentage of the calls in that sector are being transferred, it would alert the PSAP or alert CHP so that it's something that they probably ought to take a look at. So, and what that percentage is, I think that bears further discussion, but at least the capability exists where you could do that on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis or whatever you thought was appropriate, but that might be worth looking at.
I was D4. Either Bill or Scott, how is this similar or different than the RED project? I was looking back some time ago at some of the orientation materials I received from this office and saw information about the RED project. So how is this similar or different than what they were doing with the RED project?
When you look at the RED project, its function was to reduce the number of busies that callers were experiencing when they called 911 in California. That came about during the time when we saw the explosion of the use of cell phones. And we just didn't have the call taker positions to accommodate that, at least to the agency that was authorized to take those calls. So by doing the RED project, they could take a look at where a statistical value of calls were coming into, then make a decision. And I might want to be clear about that. It wasn't guaranteed you reroute. It's still based on code that it was discussed if that was the most appropriate way to get the calls to a particular agency by a decision through cooperating agencies. And that project is over with. It did a great job. It reduced busies from, I think, 45% in California to less than 1% now. So now we're going back and looking to see where we're getting too many calls potentially coming to one area and looking at routing them to a different PSAP if it's appropriate. Again, it comes back to the agreement between the agencies based on code. So what we're looking at right now is how to best identify where particular areas that are having routing issues should be reviewed at, amongst the participating agencies who are taking those calls or should be taking those calls.
I guess
it's a fine difference, I guess you would look at.
Okay, and I guess that's what concerned me. I think I spoke previously at one of our meetings here about how many county coordinators are. Los Angeles County has one. It's a massive county with 80 some odd different agencies, public service agents or law enforcement agencies, not to mention fire and all the other agencies. And I just cannot see how this accuracy is going to be improved relying on just one county coordinator, and you have dozens and dozens of small organizations that don't have the resources to fine-tune this like it sounds like the RED project did when it was around.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if we've discussed having the county coordinator or who would be the responsible party. I think we were looking at actually PSAPs making the report in that they're seeing too many transfers coming into their particular PSAP. We can, through ECAS, as Chris was pointing out, look at the number of transfers that are coming in from particular areas. And as Charlie was pointing out, we can set levels or flags that say we're seeing a higher than expected number of transfers coming in, and something maybe we could stop and take a look at in that particular area. So that would be kind of the key for us to take a look at that area.
Is it incumbent for the PSAPs for each misrouted call to report that misrouted call somehow, to get that information known?
Well, we haven't worked out those details yet. But I think it's a point where if they see a high percentage or greater than what they would think, yeah, they would want to report that and let us know about it.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Who's 5?
I think I'm 2, but I'll go anyway.
Okay.
Thank you. So as a stickler for process, I think I would really like to suggest a process that has a priority on this and timelines that we could measure the success or what work needs to continue in this area. I think it's long overdue. I mean, obviously this issue is hitting a national stage now where there's a lot of discussion on it, and I'd like to really see a report within the next month on what actions will be taken and who's going to be doing it, and some real goals and objectives attached to it. I think that one of the things that comes to mind is that when counties or cities who get misrouted calls and have to redirect calls, it's a standard way of doing business. It doesn't get reported often because it's just the way we do business. It's been happening for many, many years. Dispatchers don't report it, therefore the coordinators don't have the data, and it doesn't get reported. And so to leave it on the PSAPs, I think, is a difficult challenge. I think we need to put a different perspective on it because leaving it to the PSAPs, they're just not going to get the data. There needs to be a push to accurately get this data from dispatch centers through the county coordinators, a different campaign per se, because it's just a way of doing business. I can speak personally, our dispatch center doesn't get a lot of redirects anymore because they're just used to hitting the transfer button. So how we can look at that and motivate folks to get, I guess, a workflow that will rise to the level of priority and importance is really a high priority for me.
And just to maybe answer that point, and I think it's something that came up yesterday and Charlie brought up, and we had some discussion about, we don't want to just rely on the PSAP managers or those PSAPs that don't have staff to go and pull this report, hence the discussion about asking the CCTF to work with CHP and the state to identify what that threshold might be, where once it hits a certain percentage, then the report is automatically generated. I mean, it's still going to take some action once you receive that report, but at least, as the PSAP manager, I don't have to go run that report every month or every quarter. I'll get something in my inbox that says, hey, on this sector, you're transferring out 50% of the calls that you're receiving. So I think that's the direction we've given them, and hopefully that's what they come back with, is just identifying what those triggers and thresholds will be.
Okay, one of the things that I heard, though, is that you wanted to have something like within the next month. Is that something that the LRPC can do within the next month, working with the CCTF?
Well, our next meeting is in January, so, I mean, I think we could commit to that. They're going to have their conference call in December, and then we had planned to meet, it's January 13th, and I mean, I would fully expect that we should be able to have an answer at that point.
Yeah, I think.
Jamie, would that meet your needs?
Yeah, I think given the holidays and the complexity of scheduling, I think that's fine, but I really would be looking for, basically a project plan, how this thing is going to be attacked and what the benchmarks will be, so we have something measurable. Thank you.
But it also needs to be ongoing and continued, and it's become a standard process that we all do, the county coordinators talking with CHP and the local PSAPs. It can't just be a one-time thing. This has to be a standard process, a tool that we use to have constant monitoring.
So one of the things that I think I'm hearing is that we have a list of everything that the county coordinators do. We probably need to look at that list as well to make sure this is inserted into that list so it becomes a standard process. I had one other question, and I just don't, if I don't know the answer, I'm hoping somebody does. How do we know when a new cell sector comes up in the state? Because I've been hearing information, there could be like 1,000 a month. I don't know what the real information is, and I've been trying to track it down.
Well, that's the other discussion we had, is how do we know that the county coordinators or CHP is getting all the information from the carriers when a new cell tower, and I don't think we have a way of knowing that, do we? Michelle, help me out. I mean, is there any way you just get reports and that's what you know, what they're reporting to you? Sorry.
So we get routing sheets every time a tower is supposed to go up, but the truth is, and it's correct, is a carrier, if they don't send a routing sheet to us, we would not know that a tower came live and did not get routed. There is no real way to know that. There just isn't, other than they send us those routing sheets.
Okay, that sounds like to me something we need to take up with the CPUC, because they are the ones that regulate the wireless carriers. So the 911 office will be talking with the CPUC about that specific issue and to see if we can get some sort of standard or regulatory way to get all the cell towers as they come up in California.
I have a couple questions.
And I think on that, go ahead, Chief.
Well, there's a couple things that I heard you say, Bill, and I want to direct these to Bill and away from LRPC. First off, the RED project, if I understand correctly, the acronym was routing on empirical data. Mm-hmm. Where in the current system is the empirical data?
It's really going to be based on reporting or going through ECATS and pulling out the information.
The ECATS is based on a failure in the system, not a prevention in the system. That's when you have an incident. It would be tantamount to suggesting that we don't do testing on aircraft components until we have a crash, and then we go back and try and test and determine why the aircraft crashed.
Right.
As I understood, the RED project is the technology that you were using in that was such that you had empirical data that was done on testing that went well beyond what is done in the long time standing overlay of standing up a cell site. Karen mentioned that there's new cell sites coming on board. I was made aware that there's one carrier in Los Angeles that in the first quarter of next year, I'm sorry, in the first 8 months of next year, is going to be implementing 10,000 new sites. Mm-hmm. Now that may be small enhancements to sites, but every one of those, I can't imagine the impact of that workload on whatever body is decided or recommended here to look at. I know in the Ventura project there was a tremendous amount of empirical data that was identified that that resulted in the transfer of calls from geographical areas away from CHP to the local jurisdictions. Now, that accomplished what you said the project was for, and that was to reduce the number of busies.
Correct.
But that's looking at the symptom and not the cause. And the cause, I believe, is actually the old method of routing, which is the current method, is not as efficient as what you identified in the 6 different RED projects. Well, so I'm back to the question, why wouldn't we be using the most advanced technology to be testing these sites? And moreover, while this may be partially CPUC's responsibility, what is there within the 911 office's ability to set a standard that says when a new site goes up that you're going to use some sort of empirical data testing for that site, so we don't have to wait for the failed call to measure through ECATS and rather go out and get that testing done when the site stood up.
Let me answer this for a second. ECATS does have the empirical data. ECATS actually shows the lat long of where every cell call was made within phase 1-2 accuracy, which would be the same thing that we would use for the RED project. What I'd like to do is maybe have ECATS demonstration for the board, because the amount of empirical data that we're getting, it's really, it's no more after the fact than the RED project. And maybe we aren't using the data like we should. Maybe this is really data rich that we could use far better than we are. ECATS has been set up statewide for a little over a year now, but we do get the empirical data.
And just to add to that, I think the ECATS will help us resolve those towers that are in place. The challenge with the new towers is we have no data to go off of. Yeah. And so it's looking at a map and trying to estimate what percentage of calls will be CHP versus a PD, and then making an educated decision on how do we want to do that. And then when the ECATS data comes in, we then have some empirical data to measure against.
But the data or the system that you use to do the RED projects, you have the ability to use that to project those, where you're not doing that with ECATS. In other words, when a new site goes up, why would we want to wait for the airplane crash? Why not have the testing so that we've got it mapped as efficiently as possible and possibly use ECATS to fine-tune it?
Well, if I can say something, Chief, when you look at the RED project, it was based on historical data of where calls came in at. And they looked back a couple of years on where the calls came in at. They looked at how they were positioned within cell sectors amongst PSAPs that could potentially take those calls. Then they made a recommendation. They did not make a decision on where it would be routed. They made a recommendation that that call could potentially be rerouted based on how the calls came in. That still came down to statute to actually make decisions. So it's really made, those decisions are based on agreement between the PSAPs that are taking those calls, either be CHP or the PSAP. So with a new tower, you don't have the historical data to make a projection off that. You have nothing.
You're making my point. So I'm saying why don't we have something that we can test that before that site goes live?
Let me make a recommendation. I agree that we need to have some predictive models before a site goes live, but first we need to know where those predictive sites might be. So if we could find a way to get the tower before they are actually placed and made hot, we can look at, based on the empirical data of the call patterns in ECATS, because we have that data, and then we can make some predictive analysis. The amount of data we have is unbelievable. And so I think we have, and I see Charlie's nodding his head, so I think we have the data. It's now, how do we use this to do the predictive model as well as look at the towers that we have based on the empirical data, if they're going to the right PSAP or not.
And I think back to your earlier point is the model that the carriers are using for new cell sites is based on the initial implementation that we did 10 years ago. I mean, I'm still getting routing sheets for Bay Area cities that I direct them back to the PSAP. I got all the routing sheets for Oakland last week. So it's a very haphazard process, and I think you're right that we need to go back and find out to ensure that the carriers are routing the new sectors to the correct either county coordinator or PSAP, and that they are including all of them. Or when they change an azimuth on a sector, that all of those are being double-checked back with the PSAP or the county coordinator, and I'm fairly certain that's not happening consistently. I think you're right.
Karen, I'd also like to submit that, I know that there's other, besides the ECATS reports, there's other technologies that are out there that are measuring routing. Public Safety Network is one that I know that PSAPs are using. Can we get a presentation by them also?
What we would have to do, and I'd be more than glad to do this, is to do like an RFI to get anyone that's out there can provide this data to us, and then we can have those presentations to the board. So it would be done through the request for information proposal type process.
And how long would that take?
I can't give you an answer today on that. We'd have to go through the normal state process, and I'm kind of looking, it's usually several months.
So, because that's pretty lengthy, I mean, is there an opportunity for us just to put on the website an invitation for people to come and, submit their interest in a presentation as opposed to an RFI? I mean, that seems like a pretty bureaucratic process to me.
It is a bureaucratic process, and I apologize for it, but it's usually the way we need to handle state business. But I will absolutely go back and take a look at if we can streamline that, because any way that we can cut through some of the bureaucracy and get the information to the board, I fully support.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I don't understand the difference. What is the difference in the data collection that you used? There were all kinds of corrections made as a result of the 6 or 8 RED projects. There were things that were changed from the 10-year-old system, as Charlie described it, that were changed as a result of how that testing was done. So what is the difference between that and your current capability of ECATS?
We failed to tell you about a project we're doing.
There's a surprise.
It's been actually presented to the board in the past, but it needs to be part of this discussion. We have presented this to the board in the past. We have PSN through AT&T as their prime contractor, PSN's the subcontractor, and they're actually going out and looking for technical misroutes. And we are getting the data where the cell sectors aren't aligned accordingly, some of the antennas may not be aligned, and all that information is being pushed back to the carriers, and we're working with PSN and the carriers to correct the technical issues, which is different than the routing issues. So this is our way to make sure that when the cell sectors come up, they're actually aligned appropriately as they say they are. So we do have that project going, and we'll be glad to give you the board another briefing on that project. It's been in place for about a year now, and we are collecting good data.
Okay, I think that's good, but I still don't have an answer to the question. What's the difference between the data that was collected in those 8 projects?
Okay.
As to how something was different is what I'm saying. Yeah. There was a massive amount of correction made, and so to me it looked like here was something that we can learn from. If ECATS has got that capability, why weren't we doing that with ECATS? And if it doesn't, what is it that those projects were doing that we're not doing?
Okay, Sam, could we get back to you at the next meeting, or even get back to the board prior to that, and let us go put together a response to your answer? Because what I'd like to do is I want to make sure what we give the board is accurate, and we don't have that information with us to tell you exactly the technical differences between the routing on empirical data and the empirical data that we're collecting through ECATS. When we've looked at the differences in the office, it's the same empirical data, but I think somehow we're not hitting the mark and answering your question. So I'd like to go back and we can do a side-by-side review of those two projects, and I think that would help provide the answer.
Karen, I think the difference is that PSN in the RED project did the actual data analysis, and the data right now is there, but it's not being analyzed because it requires the CHP and the PSAPs or the county coordinator to look at those sectors and see which ones are being transferred and need to be adjusted. And that was happening. The RED project did that for us. And now we don't have a mechanism where we're really analyzing the data. It may be there, but we're not analyzing it. So I think that's part of what we've talked about, partnering with the CCTF to come up with a process on a regular basis where we're looking at those sectors and consulting with the CHP to see if we need to change where they're being routed.
And this goes back to the core of 911 system, the days when landlines were outnumbering cell phones, and if a PSAP got a misrouted 911 call, they filled out a form, and that line got routed to the proper PSAP. So we made sure that when someone called 911, they got the right PSAP that was able to immediately dispatch services and not have to transfer it off to someone else. That's the level of service that it sounds like we're lacking, that perhaps the RED project, as he just pointed out, was able to actually analyze the data, and we're not getting that analytical review now.
Right, and I don't think that the PSAPs are also reporting when there's a misroute. I think I heard Leslie say that earlier.
Well, I think they're not consistently doing that. It's like we said up here, it's our experience that they get used to a workaround and just transferring the call, and I don't believe they're all getting reported, and it's not being handled in a consistent manner county to county with the county coordinators and the PSAPs. The county coordinators in one county may be handling it themselves and looking at it and evaluating it with CHP. Another county may be involving the PSAPs. And it needs to be a consistent process to be able to have consistent information and be able to address things.
Did I misunderstand, though? And it was PSN that did the RED project, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. Did I misunderstand it? I understood in looking at this that not only did you look at the data of the calls, but you went beyond calls and did testing to determine routing accuracy. And so I'm just looking at that again, and maybe my analogy is terrible, but I still think that if there is a mechanism, if you have something that works, as 8 projects showed it did, that type of technology, why wouldn't we be overlaying that with what we have to ensure that quality, to continue to even more minimize the busy signals as was the one of the symptoms in the Ventura project for sure, and to assure that we've got the accuracy nailed down, because we just hear about it constantly and we're experiencing it ourselves.
Well,
the Chief mentioned it.
And I think that's why we gave it to the LRPC to help us come up with a solution. And so if the LRPC can take these comments and help us with this, and I think that they'll be meeting in January, and we have the CCTF also meeting in December. I value everything that the LRPC has presented to the board. They've done a really good job with helping with these analysis.
Karen, as much as, and I do appreciate the LRPC looking at the issue, and that was the suggestion that I had made at the last meeting, but I think this particular topic, and I know that LRPC has other topics on their agenda, this is a high priority for NENA. It's a high priority for me personally in my area. I think I would like to suggest that an ad hoc group of people that are interested in moving this forward at a much faster pace than the kind of traditional meetings that we have already established. This is an important issue, I think. It impacts, not only is it a technology issue, but it's impacting not only lives out there when there is a misroute, but it impacts the dispatchers. This is a real big issue when dispatchers have to reroute resources and they know that they are part of an extended response time. And that's really just, unacceptable. And we need to get, I think California can really be on the forefront of this if we were to make it a high priority and put some timelines to it. I think that, we talk a lot about it, but there's not a lot of action being taken, and I think it's time for action at this point.
Totally agree with you and totally support. So the timeline that we talked about with having the LRPC and back in meeting in January 13th and coming up with something, so what I hear you say is that is going to be too long. So if we can come up with maybe some recommendations on who we'd like to have sit on this, and we can reach out through the CCTF and get this going quicker, if that's the will of the board, I have no problem with that. If the January 13th timeline of the LRPC won't work.
I think that if we can do the reach out and have people in place in order to have that meeting, I think that's, acceptable. But I really do think that, we just need to do some work behind the scenes during that interim period so we can, we're ready to have some meaningful discussions. I think that there's a lot of, you don't know what you don't know until you have these discussions. And I think that people that are not as educated as others need to come up to that level and need to be able to advocate for the next steps. And I think that needs to take place before the January 13th meeting.
Okay, absolutely. So if we could get a recommendation on how we should move forward and a motion, I think we can move off with a plan on how to
Can I
address
add
it.
something before somebody formulates a motion?
Absolutely. Sorry,
I
Sam.
like the idea that you've suggested of having a side-by-side presentation. I think it would be in the interest of time and understanding that for the January meeting that you do a side-by-side with ECATS and PRN to look at what that is, along with the work that's done by this ad hoc committee.
It would have to be a side-by-side with ECATS and the RED project. You said PRN. I wouldn't be able to do what they're doing now. It would be based on what we did with the RED project. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I took that from what you said, that PRN had done the RED project.
Yeah, okay. Well, I just want to make sure that we were clear that, because I know that PRN, based on what I just heard, has some other offerings, or they want to do a presentation. But what we could do we just talked about it. But what we could do is a side-by-side of how we did the RED project and the data that we're collecting with ECAT, so we can show where we have the similarities and where the differences are. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay.
And only from this standpoint, if you're going to tell somebody that's done the technology presentation to present what they did in 09 to 12
No.
and take ECATS with its current technology, I want to hear what's out there so that we can have the best possible solutions technologically. And if it's something that if PRN's advanced, fine. If ECATS is advanced, or whoever put ECATS together.
I think there's other companies out there, absolutely. Okay, two different things then. We agreed that I will go out and see if there's a way that we can cut through the bureaucracy and have whoever offers this type of technology come and present to the board, whatever the company's name is. But then I also heard that you said, and I may have misunderstood, that you would like to see a side-by-side of what we have with ECATS and the empirical data that we have today and what the empirical data that we had in the RED project. They're two different issues. Definitely, we're going to get some presentations, if I can find a way to cut through the bureaucracy without going through an RFI, and let the board know everything that's out there. That yes. But
it's there, but I'm hearing a caveat in your presentation to compare what was done in the RED project as opposed to the technology that was used in the RED project. And so what I'm saying is technologies advance. If that technology that was used in 09 or 12 is advanced to a higher state, same as ECATS has progressed.
Advanced, of course.
We want to hear what the current stuff is. I'm really not concerned anymore about comparing to what was, only from a standpoint of saying we learned an awful lot then. We should be able to learn an awful lot more now from enhanced technology similar to what we built on there to improve our delivery of 911.
Okay, I think we're all in agreement. I just think it's semantics.
Okay.
Yes, we will have all the companies come that provide any types of services like that, whether it's ECATS, PSN, and I believe there is another company out there. Give us, as a board, a presentation of what they could provide us now with the current technologies.
Sounds good.
Okay. And I will see if we can do that in lieu of going through a formal request for information process. But I have to go back and double check and see what we can do.
Well, I think if we keep this in a framework of we are looking for information as to what is available technologically, there is no anticipation, there's nothing on an agenda here for us to make a recommendation. We don't even make recommendations to you on contracts. That's well beyond the scope of this board. What the board is seeking is a presentation of technology information as to those things that can enhance the delivery of 911. And so to that end, I'm not playing lawyer on you here, but to that end, I don't see it an RFI issue. I see it a request by the board for presentation on these technologies.
Sam, I am absolutely committed to make sure that I find the quickest way to bring that to the board, because I personally would like to see that as well. I think it would help everyone on the board know what's out there.
Great.
I just need to follow the state process, is all. And so if there's a way that I can do that, I will absolutely do it. If not, I will let the board know what some of my obstacles are, and maybe we can look at alternatives. But I am committed to get that to the board as quickly as I can.
Okay.
And to Jamie's request that we put this to a work group, we have an existing work group policy, the work group that worked on policy that's representative of all the PSAPs and different size PSAPs throughout the state, and maybe that's the appropriate place to address this and fast track it, as the LRPC isn't meeting for a couple of months.
I would suggest that we use that at least existing working group to get going.
I agree. I mean, they're already together, so they could get working very quickly. And as evidenced by the policy review that was done, they can get things done much quicker than we can at the LRPC. And they do report back to the LRPC, so we could still, provide them with the information that we have and the guidance.
I think that's acceptable. I'm not sure who's on that group, but if they're willing to take it on and fast track it, I think that's a great solution.
Chuck is the chairperson. So.
Yes, as the chair of that, or facilitator of that group, I think the working group would be willing to take that on and get you an answer as quickly as possible.
Okay, is everybody good? We have a committee already in place. It's kind of their role anyway to be doing this. Could I have a motion to, I believe I would like to have a motion on this so we can all vote and agree that this is the best course of action to take.
I'll move to have the wireless accuracy issue explored by the working group that reports to the LRPC and have a report back sometime before January 13th.
Just one amendment to that motion, that they work in conjunction with CCTF. We'd want their input, I'm sure.
I'll make that recommendation to move that forward as well.
Okay, so we have a motion to utilize our committee that reports to the LRPC. It's the policy committee to work in conjunction with the LRPC to develop a plan forward on the wireless routing issues. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I think it's work in conjunction with CCTF, report back to the LRPC in January.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Is there all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Pardon me, this be time for comment, is that correct?
All the comments are at the end of the agenda at the public comment.
According to the agenda, the comments are solicited for each agenda item.
Okay, I have an attorney in the room. I just want to make sure I follow the process.
Absolutely. I'm simply referring, or I would refer you to the minutes, pardon me, to the agenda. The agenda in the first paragraph says that public comment is welcome for each agenda item.
Okay, well then, please come up and public comment.
Thank you. Is it acceptable to your attorney?
Yeah,
He's right behind you, and I see his head nodding, so yes, we're good.
you can comment prior to that. Thank you, sir.
So, good morning. My name's Angelo Salvucci. I'm the
medical director for emergency medical services for Santa Barbara and Ventura County. Someone mentioned the Ventura project. I'm the former chair of the California Commission on Emergency Medical Services, and I had some prepared comments which I was going to deliver at the end of the meeting, but this is the topic, and so I thought it might be best if I spoke now. So I entered with concerns about the pace and the substance of the topic, but my concerns have increased based on today's discussion. And what I heard is that there's no organized way to know when cell towers are coming up, how to examine them, how to know the accuracy of their routing, and even whether or not they're there. I also heard that the ECATS transfer process might be a way to examine this. But there are transfers that are appropriate and that are part of a normal, high-functioning emergency response system, such as when there's a crash on a freeway and that call is transferred to the fire department for a medical and rescue response. That's an appropriate transfer. Then there are inappropriate transfers, such as when someone has a cardiac arrest a half a mile from a freeway and the CHP has no response and simply is transferring the call and delaying the processing of that 911 call. So the transfer method I heard described gives us no useful information. So I'm speaking on behalf of my patients in Santa Barbara and Ventura County, and through our state association, all of the EMS responses throughout the state. The RED project started in 2008 and started in my 2 counties and was highly successful in both improving the routing accuracy and decreasing the busies. But I don't believe it's appropriate to look at just the decrease in busies when it's our collective goal to improve our response. What we know is calls that are routed to a PSAP that can do nothing but interrogate the caller and transfer it are misrouted calls. And whether that initial PSAP sends a response or not is not collected in this transfer method. When the RED project was terminated 2 years later, last year, I sent a letter to our assembly member, Doss Williams, to tell him that it was a great concern of mine that delayed responses caused by misrouted calls were increasing response times to my patients, and the lives of my patients are being threatened by it. He met with you, Ms. Wong, and to my knowledge, no action was taken. In January of this year, the ultimate tragedy occurred. An identified individual died as a result of a misrouted call and a delayed response. In April, Mr. Williams convened a meeting with you and your staff, and at that time, we all agreed that the wireless optimization service built on the technology of the RED project would be started again. We also knew that it was on a CalNet 2 contract and could be started that day. The only barrier was financing. Since that time, by the way, let me pause for a second. I have copies of the letter to Assemblymember Williams here to insert into the record. Since that time, I've sent 3 emails to you and your staff and received no reply. In each of them, I've offered to help assist in the securing of financing. My assistance has not been used. I've not been communicated to in any way. Our State Association of EMS Medical Directors has sent a letter to the governor, to key legislators on all the emergency response committees in the legislature, and to Mr. Ghilarducci. We think that this needs immediate action. This needed immediate action 2 years ago, needed immediate action after the January 30th event, and it needs immediate action today. And what I'm hearing is that this is going to go through another review process in the quote-unquote state bureaucracy. And I don't understand why that has to occur. I don't understand why we have a proven program that saves lives, that hundreds of people are dying as a result of not having it every year in California, that we can't have a system that works. And I would encourage you strongly to not take this proposed course of action that I heard described
and to revisit the possibility of using a proven system that works in my county. Everyone wants to come visit me, I'll show you how it works, and reduces the number of inappropriate delays to my patients and patients in all of your jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'd also like to comment on that.
Of course. And if you could state your name also, please.
Yes, I will. Good morning. My name is Warner McGrew, retired fire chief for the city of Santa Barbara. I want to talk to you this morning about the death of Jordan Soto on behalf of myself and on behalf of the family. I'd like to qualify myself by telling you that I served on the Santa Barbara City Fire Department for 35 years, last 7 years as the fire chief. One of the boards that I served on was the 911 board for kids. I'm currently a liaison officer for Federal All-Risk Management Team and a third-generation public safety member. In a letter to California State Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, I referred to the state's misconfigured 911 call routing infrastructure. It is my opinion, based on local experience, there are examples of large time delays in the routing of wireless 911 calls made in the Santa Barbara area via the CHP Dispatch Center located in Ventura County, some 30 miles away. These calls are rerouted back to Santa Barbara City Dispatch Center, causing a loss of time and ultimately the loss of life and property. A recent example involved the loss of a 24-year-old young lady and family friend. Pardon me just for a minute. Jordan Soto, who was survived by her 6-month-old son, Dash. Jordan lived less than a mile from Fire Station 5 and less than a mile from a major hospital. Jordan's mother and father related to me that a 15 to 20-minute delay was created by the confusion involving the CHP and the city dispatch after they found their daughter unconscious and called 911 for help. The delay in response is believed to have led to her death. After hearing the Soto's comments, it is my feeling that the 911 routing infrastructure failed Jordan Soto and her family. There was a program that you've mentioned this morning in place, and it was terminated, that would have dealt with this matter. On behalf of Cindy and Ruben Soto and myself, after working on this issue for several years, we ask that you provide a solution to this problem as soon as possible so that tragedy is not repeated and another life is not lost. Thank you for your time. I have a letter that I'd like to submit that was sent to Hannah Beth Jackson, State Senator.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've had public comment. We have a motion to go forward and a second. Is there further discussion?
I've got a couple questions, if I can. If I understood the doctor's statements correctly, there's an existing contract in place that would allow the facilitation, absent funding, of course, that would allow the ability to apply the technology that we've used on the RED project to enhance accuracy, that contract is in place?
I am not sure, and the reason why is CalNet 3 is in place now. I believe our CalNet 2 had the RED project in there. I have to go back and double check. Honestly, I don't know what's in CalNet 3. We were told a lot of the 911 services would not be included in CalNet 3.
Can I ask, is Santa Barbara and Ventura County contracting with PSN themselves? If it's not being contracted with, because you said you were still using it in your county.
So it's not being used. The RED project only examined less than 10% of today's cell sectors. Unfortunately for us, many of those were in Ventura and Santa Barbara, and those that are still working are the ones I'm referring to.
Right, but you don't have any way of knowing the new ones that have come from 2012 on.
No. and
You're
from
not
what
contracting as
what
far
I'm-
as today
No,
with
from what
PSAP.
I'm gathering, no one does.
Okay, I just
but
want to
that's
clarify
correct.
that because I kind of misunderstood that maybe you were still using it on your own in the counties to look at new cell towers from 2012.
Yeah, there is no
There-
ongoing monitoring. We do not have an independent
So it
agreement
ended
with
in
Public
Ventura
Safety
and Santa
Network.
Barbara as well as the rest of the state, the RED project. That's correct. Is
Pardon
that
me?
correct? It ended in your counties as well?
It ended, that's correct.
And you're not continuing it on your own?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, folks, we're all on the same team here. and
Right.
I'm not
No, I just
gathering
want to
that we're
make sure
working
that
in
I
the same
didn't
team.
understand that you were able to contract on your own as far as a county with PSM.
That's right.
Okay.
Can
Thank you.
someone provide some brief context to me in terms of this issue as it relates to primary and secondary PSAPs and CHP's jurisdiction along their roadways? Because I hear two separate issues. One is the issue of the accuracy of where these calls are coming from, and another is an issue of process, of call handling, of the separation of police and fire dispatch centers, and the passing of calls multiple times. Two, in my eyes, unless I'm wrong, which is always possible, two very separate and distinct issues that are yet intertwined in this. So can somebody provide some context into how they relate to one another and how the proposed, some iteration of the RED project 2.0 also addresses the issue of primary, secondary PSAPs, and that doesn't get away from there still being call transfers, which is an issue here. If the resident lived close to an interstate, as I do, when I call 911 from a cellular from my home, it goes to CHP and then is routed to the appropriate PSAP.
I
That's
guess
not
that
a
goes back to
cellular
exactly what
issue.
I said earlier about
Yeah.
how the 911 system works and how it was originally designed back when landlines, hard lines were more numerous than cell phones. If you dialed 911 and it didn't go to the specific right PSAP, that PSAP would fill out appropriate paperwork and get it switched so it went to the right PSAP. The secondary transfers are always going to occur, so if they call but it's a fire issue or a medical issue, it'll be transferred to the appropriate fire department, medical service provider, but it's getting that initial call to the right location in the first place. You probably have, when you call from your home, you have a service provider that call should directly go to based on where you live, and that's the issue that's not happening, is it shouldn't go to CHP because you're not on the freeway. You're in a house someplace. So you have a law enforcement agency or a PSAP that should be receiving that call, and then if you had an issue on the freeway, they would transfer to CHP. But it should go to the appropriate PSAP in the first place, so there's no delay in having to transfer it to another PSAP.
So we're saying the technology exists that delineates between the freeway and a block off the freeway?
And I think technology is our challenge, because when we look at traditional landline phones, I know your address, I know where I need to route your call when you pick up 911. And if you dialed 911 from your home landline phone and it went to CHP or went to a different city, that's where you're filling out a form and saying, hey, that one line was routed the wrong way. Our challenge with cell phones under our current system is they're done by a sector. So every call that comes in within a large geographic sector has to be routed to a single PSAP. And if 99% of the calls are going to be CHP's calls, I think everybody would agree that all those calls in that sector would have to come to CHP. Unfortunately, that 1% of the call that is not in our jurisdiction has to come through us before we go to next gen, which then would be able to differentiate based on your location. But given today's technology, then it's the discussion of, all right, we need to get those and make sure that process is efficient and fast as possible. Now, if we reversed it and 99% of the calls were not ours on that tower, we would agree that it needs to go to a different PSAP.
Sure.
And that's what the RED project was doing. The RED project was using that empirical data to define and better determine where that call should have been routed to in the first place.
Right, and to identify those towers.
And it seems like we lost that capability.
Well, and I think one of the challenges is the REDS project was a snapshot in time. And I think the challenge that we're really talking about today is how do we make that an ongoing process that we don't have to manually look at every tower under a certain amount of time, that is there a way to have ECATs start to flag those towers, whether it's an old tower, whether it's a brand new tower that just came online that says, hey, we've hit a threshold, a certain percentage, most of the calls that are being answered by CHP actually are being redirected somewhere else, so that we can then very quickly identify those towers and get them rerouted, as opposed to relying on a PSAP that says, hey, I think we're getting too many calls, we need to take a look at this tower, or because some situation happens, we say, hey, let's evaluate that tower, but make it a more automated process, so we're not paying to look at a tower that hasn't really changed. We can focus our resources on those towers that need to be evaluated and need to be changed, and then we can make those evaluations, look at the data, the empirical data, and do that. And I think, I think that's our goal of what we're trying to do today, is to accelerate that process and say, hey, what's a quick way we can do this, so that we have the shortest amount of time if we do have a tower that's having calls that are going to the wrong PSAP, that we can get that corrected as quickly as possible, as opposed to having a system that says once a year or once a quarter or every 6 months. And I think the other challenge is there are thousands of cell towers that are coming online. And if we can get technology to look at that for us, that then takes a lot of the human work out of it, speeds up the process, and we get those things routed right.
I think you've encapsulated some of what I was saying. The only thing that I'd offer is what you described in the beginning should be the process for prioritizing it. I think that what we learned looking through the data of the RED project is that the old system is like doing the old vellum overlays that we used to do on maps. It was the manual version of GIS. You put a layer over a map and then another layer to determine whatever you're doing. Well, that's the way we've been doing the cell site routing in the past. I think RED project showed us that there's other ways to determine that data ahead of time even. And so to that end, use what you've suggested, Scott, is that what we do is prioritize the sites that absolutely need to be analyzed first. But I'd offer the technology has come to a place now where we need to be looking statewide so that we can avert those potential issues where this may have contributed, with all respect, Doctor, may have contributed to a delay in response. And we know that anecdotally that if the more we have to transfer a call, the more time passes, and those precious few minutes in the beginning of the medical, certainly in a medical call for service, is absolutely crucial, and that's life-saving time. So I don't minimize that at all, but I think that it's essential that we identify the technology, get that technology applied ASAP, so that we are minimizing those.
And I agree. I think it's whether it's a PSN, ECATs. When we talk about it, if we rely on individual PSAPs and even counties, we're going to have a human failure factor there. And the doctor brought up a good point in terms of transfers. Transfers from the CHP may be legitimate transfers, so you can't just look at the number of transfers. It may be an accident on the freeway that was then transferred to a fire or an EMS agency for that secondary response. So we need to figure out some metrics that can clearly identify what sectors do need to be changed in terms of their routing. And I think that really is a challenge. The RED project did a great job of that, but it focused primarily on the areas around the freeway. Is that correct, Karen? That was what it was designed to do, and really did improve the routing in those areas. And we just need to be able to figure out a metric or a way to be able to identify other sites that also need to be rerouted.
May I make one more comment in response to Mr. Spiegel? Every single time, I want to underscore, every single time a call goes to a PSAP whose only role is to transfer that call, that's a delay. Every 1 minute delay, and these delays average more than that, reduces the likelihood of survival from sudden cardiac arrest by 10%. If you run those numbers statewide, somebody's dying every day in California because of misrouted calls, and by misrouted I mean going to a place that can't send responders. can only transfer that call. So I want to underscore the importance, and I remain troubled and want to be part of the solution at the same time, but I remain troubled that I bring this to the attention 2 years ago. We mentioned it again a year ago, and that today we don't know whether a contract exists. That to me needs an accelerated evaluation and response. And if it were me, and I manage systems as well, I'd be looking to sign a contract tomorrow, because somebody's going to die tomorrow. So I appreciate your consideration.
Make one comment. All of this discussion about sectors is great. Having been a project coordinator for the RED project for Alameda County, I have some experience in implementing that system. And no matter what we do, we can look at sectors, we can reassign them or not reassign them. The bottom line is, until we can route by latitude, longitude, XY coordinates, we're not going to be able to fix this problem. The problem is Nate's house that's a block off the freeway is always going to be in that sector that covers the freeway, and if the majority of the calls are in for CHP, then they're going to go to CHP no matter what. Until we get Nate's XY location from his wireless phone to route that call, which is the next phase, next generation of 911, we're not going to fix the problem completely. We can improve it, but we can't fix it. And we can't fix Nate's problem. Sorry.
You have a motion and a second?
Any more comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second to the motion. Unless there's further comments, would you guys like to vote? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Oppose?
Aye.
Okay, we have one opposed to the motion. Everyone else agreed, so the motion carries. Okay, now moving on to the next item is our 911 Advisory Board meeting dates for next year. I believe they were sent out to everybody, and the dates are February 18th, May 13th, August 12th, and November 18th. Okay, so if there's any discussion on those, we will go on to the next item on the agenda, which is reports. Bill Anderson, thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, can I go back to the dates? I had sent an email back when the dates came out about the February date. What was the modified date?
February is February 18.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Based on the extended discussion with wireless routing, I'll kind of keep this as short as possible because I know we have other presenters behind me, and I don't want to encroach in their time. Looking at the handouts you have the wireless 911 deployment handout. If you do notice, we actually have some improvement this time. We went from the 11 PSAPs not taking wireless calls to 10. Oakland is now starting to take their calls, so I guess any improvement is good improvement in that area as we see PSAPs take their wireless calls. Please review the status activity report. As always, if there's discrepancies there, please call Paul DeMay from our office and he can make changes to that. You should have a copy of the Setna Fund condition statement and a copy of the Setna Fund graph in your booklet. We have not received the new numbers for the Setna Fund yet, so we have not rechanged or modified the projections of the Setna Fund and where it's going to be in the next few years. Based on the change in surcharge, we do expect, as I believe I talked about last, a peak in revenues at the end of this calendar year, and that again will start decreasing due to the negative annual growth rate of the Setna Fund. So while we don't expect an improvement, there probably won't be a huge change, but it doesn't belay the fact that the Sentinel Fund is in a little bit of fiscal trouble. We do need to make some changes to that to increase the revenues, especially if we're going to be moving to next gen in the near future. So that's definitely something we're looking at on potential ways of resolving that problem. Looking at the projects within the 911 branch, of course, we're still working with rolling out text to 911 in California. We're working with San Bernardino County, Butte County, and parts of Riverside County in rolling out text to 911. Hopefully, we'll start seeing those deployments occurring first half of 2015. I am happy to report that we are getting more inquiries from other counties right now and looking at rolling out text. So I think the initial resistance is starting to diminish a little bit, and we're seeing other PSAPs consider that. We think once we get some of the issues resolved with the technology of text to 911, then we'll start seeing even a greater increase in PSAPs willing to take text. So that's positive there. As far as programs, a 911 education and awareness program, we talked about that last time. That was the program to help PSAPs market out to the public on the proper use of 911 and when to call 911. Definitely to use 911 in an emergency, not for general questions or information. That project is coming to an end. All of the pilot projects were completed. We are now in the process of getting a final report from our contractor, OLV Worldwide. That should be done in January. And we're looking at doing a presentation at NENA in February. We've asked our contractor to come down and do a presentation. So since we'll have all the PSAPs there, or PSAP managers there, we figure this is a great opportunity to push the word out about the importance of marketing and making sure the public knows how to use 911. We're also looking at having the 5 PSAP managers who participated in the program come down and do a panel discussion. We feel it's very important that PSAPs hear from their peers, since these are the individuals who share the same experiences, not only in size of PSAPs, resources, and funding, that they can relate their experiences to the other PSAPs and how they're able to accomplish the task at hand. So that'll be coming up in February. As far as Next Gen 911, as Member Berdan mentioned, that's definitely important as we move forward in helping resolve the routing issues. The RFO for the contractor, we were hoping to have had that out before this meeting. Due to some delays in reviews, we are expecting that. It's at procurement right now. We expect that to be released on the street very shortly. So I'm going to go out on a limb again and say by next AB or advisory board meeting, we should have our contractor in place and moving forward with our transition plans. We're also finalizing the specifications for the RFP for the new procurement for CPE equipment and next-gen services. That'll be going over to our state procurement board in December and hopefully being released to the street early January. We expect that it'll take about 8 to 11 months to vet and actually start awarding contracts. So latter part of 2015, we hope to have that in place. The final remaining pilot projects at this point are Mendocino and Pasadena Ring projects. As I mentioned last time, we had worked with AT&T in regards to issues we had with the current CPE vendor not being able to meet commitment dates. That has now been changed. We are now working with, well, it was Cassidian, it's now Airbus. And so we have a new schedule. We expect to have all of the hosted solution in place by March of 2015, which is a big improvement over where we were. And current schedules look at having the ESINet in place by the end of 2015 for those 2 projects. And again, with the Ventura hosted project, the hosted solution was completed, has been in place for a year or so now. We're currently working now on the proof of concept for location-based routing. And that should be be doing the testing very shortly. So we should have some, hopefully, information on live LBR testing from that particular area. So that's a quick update on where we are with the 911 office right now. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question and a request. On the projects, can we get a presentation or have the vendors here to present to the board? Because there's some challenges still with texting to 911, and I think that we need to educate the board as far as what those challenges are with these projects and being able to transfer and what may be hurdles still with texting to 911 as we move forward and challenges with that. Because I don't think it's clear to everyone.
Okay.
At least it wasn't clear.
I missed the first part of what you were saying, and I'm having a
As
hard
far
time
as
hearing
the
the audio right
projects and the
here.
results of the projects, could we get a presentation or have someone come and talk about the different challenges and hurdles with texting to 911 and the challenges that we're still facing? Even though we're rolling this out in some areas, we're doing things that are different in some cases, and there are still challenges out there of whether certain PSAPs may be accepting those calls from text.
So you're looking specific to text to 911?
That would be a part of this presentation with these projects, with texting to 911 and some of the hurdles, maybe a broader scope with Next Gen 911, what you've seen in those projects. An overview presentation. I know the reports are going to be out there, but I think it's important that we have an update from the state to say what those challenges were and what we're still facing as PSAPs and secondary PSAPs.
Okay.
I just want to interject. I think that's an extremely important subject. Instead of having it as part of the reports, I think we should have it under new business and have a full-blown report and discussion on text to 911.
Yes.
Yeah, that's definitely
It's a
something we
separate
can do.
topic.
Leslie, I would direct you to our website. We have published the text to 911 report we did back in April, and use that as an initial basis just to familiarize yourself.
And I have looked at it, but I'm one person, and I think even it's nice that it's out there, but people may not understand some of the terminology, may not understand some of the recommendations or the verbiage in there of what happened during those projects.
Right. We can, I'll be glad to do that. We've done that presentation to PSAPs across California at this point in time, so we can definitely take that and bring it in front of the board and do the presentation on text to 911 and look at the different technologies that have been reviewed and what we're making recommendations are and how we're going forward with text and the issues with rolling it out.
And
That's not a
another
problem.
just concern is the public education piece. I mean, we're saying that we're, going to accept, certain things in certain counties, and what does that mean exactly? And that doesn't mean every county in California is, and I think there's some misnomers when you see people on TV, and that comes to being able to do this, and, possibly, that misnomer that just because one county is doing it or one part of the county, that doesn't mean everyone is able to text to 911 and get an answer or response.
Okay. Other questions?
So I just hope that the educational piece, because I've seen some things on TV that, we're rolling this out, but what does that exactly mean?
We'll talk about the education awareness. We'll do a full-blown report and actually go into detail about the different technologies. Some of the PSAPs, based on their older equipment, would have to use TTY in order to do text to 911. So I think it's really critical that we walk through that with the board.
Right, and there may be some challenges and limitations and why you wouldn't want to do that until the actual technology is in place.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
County Coordinator Task Force report. Did I pass up the long range? Yeah. Chris, I am sorry.
Well, it
this is like
seems
the
like we
second
gave
time
our,
I've done that.
Yeah, it's because it seems like we gave our report.
Yes.
I'll
Let's go forward with the Long Range Planning Committee report. Sorry.
Sure. We met yesterday, which was our only meeting since the last advisory board meetings. Just a quick update on some of the topics. There was some discussion on PSAP closure and consolidation and what happens with the equipment upon that. As you know, the ownership of CPE is transferred to the PSAP during the procurement process, but the state does consider and meet with the PSAPs on a case-by-case basis to find a reasonable solution on what happens to equipment during a consolidation, and the goal is always to repurpose that equipment. Regarding the Warren Act, just to, I think, circle back on that again, the LRPC does have a final draft of the Warren Act with our recommended changes. I'm going to work with Paul, make sure that gets sent out to the advisory board members as well as stakeholders for a final request for input so that this group can consider it at the next meeting as our recommendation to the groups that we represent for the changes that need to take place. We've also discussed that the Revenue and Taxation Code also needs some updating because of its impacts to CETNA, and the Public Safety 911 Coalition is willing to work with the state 911 branch on language revisions And that's, I believe, Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's with the goal of having that ready for the 2016 legislative session. We received the CCTF report, text to 911 report that Bill just went over. Just for clarification, what was referred to as the policy and practices work group is just the 911 work group. They'll still be under the LRPC. We've given them an assignment today, and then we also anticipate that they'll be working with the state 911 branch on the next-gen transition plan in early 2015. We also identified our meeting dates for next year. Paul will have those, and that'll be posted, but it's the Tuesday prior to the advisory board meetings, as well as the second Tuesday of the month in the months preceding advisory board meetings. And then the last thing is on the wireless topic. I know we moved on, but we had split it into two things. One is really what we covered here today so far, and then the other was more the FCC issue. And the discussion amongst the LRPC was that that was a topic better further discussed here if the advisory board members so wanted. So that's my report.
Just to explain that FCC topic, it's the phase 1, phase 2 calls, correct?
Correct. And specifically, we talked a little bit about the agreement that's been reached between APCO, NENA, and the 4 major carriers that was published just recently.
One thing, Chris, I wanted to mention, we mentioned that we need to look at SB 1211 too against the Warren Act.
That's correct. Part of our review for the Warren Act and the Revenue and Taxation Code is including looking at 1211.
Okay, if there's no comments or questions, we'll move to the next item. County Coordinator Task Force, thank you.
Good morning, Tracy Kessler for CCTF. The CCTF continues to participate as a member of the 911 work group, and we'll be working on the wireless routing. Also, we provide support and advice to the California 911 Education and Awareness Program. The CCTF has applied to have a breakout session at NENA Mission Critical Training Event in February of 2015 to explain the role of county coordinator. Our target audience will be PSAP managers, but everybody will be invited to join, and our goal is to educate them on the role and duties of the county coordinator position. Our Southern California Coordinator Forum will be May 5th, 2015 at Verdugo Fire in Glendale. And our Northern California Forum will be held in the third quarter of 2015, a date yet to be determined. The agenda items are still being determined at this time for those. The CCTF continues to evaluate the results of the California County Coordinator Survey. We have determined that new coordinators need a training track and we plan to hold one of our 2 annual face-to-face meetings in February to plan that out. As of now, we still have the mentor program for new county coordinators. So when we find out about a new county coordinator, they get in contact with Ella, and either she helps them out or asks one of the other CCTF members to help them out and guide them through what they need to know or who they need to contact and what programs they need to have access to and that sort of thing. So we do plan to have something that we can hand out also to them after our face-to-face meeting. Also, we would like to introduce our newest member, Gerard Heidekamp. He's with Contra Costa County. He's not here today, but he's our new member. And that is all I have.
Okay. Any questions, comments? Okay, we can move to our next report, which is on the California First Responder Network and FirstNet update.
Good morning, Steve Yarborough reporting. So since the last quarterly meeting, we've had FirstNet issued a request for information, which we responded to with the help of our advisory committee regarding the technical elements of the proposed network. So that was one of the things that happened. The response was posted October 27th on that. At the same time, they also issued a public notice for input on the proposed legal interpretations of the Act. This revolved around the definitions in the Act, specifically things such as what is constituted to be a rural area, what would be a primary or secondary user of the network. So the input on those definitions was provided at the same time, October 27th, so those are a couple of things that happened there. We held 2 more town halls. One September 24th we held in Fairfield. This was on emergency medical services. We also held one in Santa Ana on September 30th that had a law enforcement theme. The following day, October 1st, we held the CalFriend board meeting in Diamond Bar down south. And that afternoon after the board meeting, we held our second OEC broadband consultation preparation workshop. So all events were well attended down south. Our next town hall is going to be this afternoon. The topic for that one is going to be 911, so we look forward to seeing many of the same people at that meeting. We're going to do more town halls coming up in the near future. Shortly after the first of the year, we're going to be sort of shifting the way we do town halls to be more of a focused and interactive dialogue rather than just a presenting information. We want to actually engage with the local responders so we can get some feedback from them in more of a back and forth type of way. So doing that starting after the first of the year, we're planning on doing one in Humboldt County January 28th to start that phase off. And then right now we're working on preparing a submission to FirstNet, our state consultation checklist. This is the package that we present to FirstNet so we can get in the queue to have them schedule our initial consultation, which should be coming up in the first part of 2015. So those are the events that we've been doing and looking forward to doing in the short or near-term future. That's all I have.
Any questions? Okay, we will now move to the next item on the agenda, which is the presentations. But I do want to ask, we do not have a break on the agenda. Does everyone need a break, or do we want to continue going forward? I'm good with going forward. Okay. Power through meetings. Okay, our next item is the presentation on the 7-state 911 outage. We're fortunate to have Bill Schreier from the state of Washington. Washington State was hit the hardest with the 7-state outage. It was an outage that lasted 6 hours. California's Northeast grant project, the 911 project, was also affected by this outage. 30,000 of our citizens were affected, and 46 911 calls were lost as a result of this outage. So, welcome, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for having me today. I'm a former information technology professional, so I can't talk without pictures. So what you've got is a PowerPoint presentation, but it's mostly pictures, because that's what I understand. So a little bit about me. I chair the State Interoperability Executive Committee in Washington State, and which is composed of, it's kind of like this committee, it's composed of both state agency heads, like the Chief of the State Patrol and the Adjutant General, but it's also got a number of local representatives, sheriffs, police chiefs, fire chiefs, a 911, we have a 911 center director and an emergency manager. And it's mostly about radio and wireless interoperability. It is the FirstNet state point of contact. I was the Chief Technology Officer in the city of Seattle. I went through a lot of EOC activations there, spent a little bit of time in the Army Corps of Engineers. And a long, long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I was a cop. And occasionally I was stupid enough when my sergeant said, we need somebody to, we have a sick dispatcher, we need someone to answer 911 calls, I'd say, yeah, I'll do it. And that is a hard job. It's about all I have to say on that. But I have done it. This is just a little bit about the State Interoperability Executive Committee. I've already mentioned the composition of it, but that's a graphic with photographs. Again, state agencies and local agencies. County Commissioner, we have a mayor, Quinault Indian tribal representative as well. So Washington State, you in California are not strangers to some of these things that go on in terms of disasters. Volcanic eruption, Mount St. Helens. Every year we have wildfires, just like California does. 2001, we had an earthquake, not nearly as big as Loma Prieta. only $1 billion of damage and 1 death. But nevertheless, we're subject, like California is, to a 9.0 at some point in the future on the Seattle fault. And then, of course, a long coastline, not quite as long as California's, but rugged and a lot colder, and challenged from sea level to 14,000 feet in terms of the elevation. So lots of disasters that go on. Just briefly, this is a disaster which occurred on Memorial Day last year, May of 2013. It occurred at the worst possible time, like 7 o'clock p.m. on a Friday night. Bridge over of Interstate 5 bridge north of Seattle collapsed into the river. Luckily, no one died, but that's broadcast from emergency services in Skagit County advises that cell phones are no longer working. And that meant that people couldn't call 911 from that location. And of course, wireless data for responders was not available as well. Also, I have to mention the State Route 530. We call it the State Route 530, but it's better known as the Oso landslide, which occurred on March 22nd this year. One of the things that it did, you can see the photograph of the landslide there. It took out a fiber optic cable that served 911 service for the town of Darrington. Luckily, that was recognized almost immediately, and the 911 center there, it's called Snowpack for Snohomish County, was able to reroute calls to a local police station in Darrington, which accepted 911 calls. Frontier Communications was great. By the time the first urgent urban search and rescue team arrived on site a couple days later, Frontier had already strung a fiber optic cable to reconnect Darrington for 911 service and internet. And the last thing I'll mention in terms of 911 before I get to the outage, second to the last thing, sorry. Carlton Complex fire was the largest fire in Washington State history. It burned this last summer in our Okanagan County and Chelan County, which is the central part of the state to the north. And as you can see there, fiber optic cable lines again were destroyed. Some homes and small communities were cut off to 911 calls. And cell sites went down as well in Okanagan County. Again, one of those 911 outages that results from a disaster. So when I came to Sacramento, I actually live in Seattle. I do want to warn you, I'm not here to take away the Sacramento Kings. However, Seattle and Washington State did have another event this year, which it's a little bit hard to see. That's the Seattle Police Department escorting the Seattle Seahawks in the victory parade after the Super Bowl, after they won the Super Bowl in January. Here's the headline in the Seattle Times the next day. Cell use at Seahawks parade swamped wireless networks. So even though the wireless networking folks knew about this in advance, it only had 3 days advance notice, and they deployed cows. They really tried hard, cells on wheels, to make sure there was connectivity. There still was almost no connectivity for 3 hours that morning. And that meant that people couldn't call 911. The 700,000 people on the parade route couldn't call 911 either. Luckily, there were a number of cops and firefighters along the route. Their land mobile radios worked. Those few incidents that we had, it was a cold February morning, so we didn't riot like San Francisco did after winning the World Series. But those 700,000 people were able to find a cop or a firefighter who used their LMR to get help. But I bring this up only because, again, it was a 911 outage that could have had serious consequences due to an overload. Okay, so let's get to the outage of the 10th of April, 2014. This is a little bit of the timeline of this. It started at 11:54 p.m. On the 9th of April and ended at approximately 6:30 the next morning, the 10th of April. So it occurred at a good time, if there's ever a good time for a 911 outage, in the early morning hours. It did affect about 6,600 calls across 7 states, and I've got more detail on that in a moment. PSAPs, I think the first notification that I can find in the literature was, in the reports, was about 2:30 that the PSAPs called CenturyLink. Some of them might have called that before. It affected every PSAP in Washington State. There's about 89 of them, except for 2 counties, Garfield County and Skamania County, which are rural counties in central and southern Washington. Just a brief explanation of what happened, and this is from CenturyLink and their subcontractor Intrado. So you all know this as well or better than I do. When a 911 person calls, typically if it's a landline phone, and often if it's a wireless phone, it goes to a telephone company central office. It's converted to internet protocol. And then what happens in the CenturyLink area and other areas around the country, the call is routed to one of 2 selective routers that are maintained by Intrado. If it's a telephone company like CenturyLink that has an agreement with Intrado to provide NENA. And then those selective routers reserve a camera trunk at the PSAP, determine which PSAP has got the 911 call it needs to be routed to, and then reserve a camera trunk at the PSAP and complete the call. So that's the normal call flow, obviously at a high level. Here's what happened on April 10th. So that the calls were routed, but all the calls went through the Inglewood selective router. It had a counter in its database that basically was a number from 1 to 40 million. And it provides a unique number which Inglewood then uses to reserve the camera trunk. It says, I've got this camera trunk reserved at this PSAP with this particular identifier. It tells the Miami selective router, I've got this camera trunk reserved, don't try to, if you get a call routed to that PSAP, don't try to use that camera trunk, I've got it reserved. And then it sends back to the legacy network gateway, hey, I'm okay, I've got this handled. Well, what happened on April 10th was the counter reached 40 million. And the selective router, so it maxed out, so it couldn't no longer give a unique identifier because the counter had maxed out. It didn't tell, no alarm was set off. It still told the Miami selective router, I got this handled, so calls were not automatically rerouted to Miami. And it reserved the camera trunk, but the call did not go through. And what happened to the caller was sometimes they got a busy signal, oftentimes the call just went away. It was dropped. And so that's what happened on that morning. Because it was a counter issue, a database issue, it really didn't set off any high-level alarms at Intrado. It set off some low-level alarms, but they didn't figure out to several hours into the problem that there actually was a problem and it was in their selective router. Here are the effects, which are well reported in the FCC. This is mostly from the FCC database. 81 PSAPs affected in 7 states, including some counties in Northern California. Although I think that those were Verizon wireless customers, and when the FCC contacted those PSAPs, they weren't even aware that there had been an outage because so few calls actually were made on that morning. That is at least what the FCC report said, although you probably have better information on that. Washington had the most significant part of this. Here's the total number of consumers that were possibly affected based on the PSAPs that were involved. You see 13 in California and possibly 30,000, so obviously these were smaller counties in Northern California, 8 counties in Northern California. Although, again, it affected almost the entire state of Washington. I don't know what that number 52 is in Washington, because Washington's got 86 or 89 PSAPs, and almost all of them were affected. So I think that might be an error in the FCC report. And this is the number of calls by the call type, voice over IP, wireless, and wireline, insofar as the FCC could determine, but this only represents 3 states. There's a number of recommendations in the FCC report. Is this being recorded, Karen? Okay. They're fairly high level. let's just say. They're kind of blah, blah, blah. Develop and implement next generation 911 best practices. Okay, that makes sense. The FCC should conduct further proceedings on 911 reliability. Well, I'm sure the FCC will. Better situational awareness. I think this is a relatively important recommendation because nobody really knew what was going on. PSAPs thought that they had a problem. They were failing over to their backup systems. And Toronto didn't know what was going on. CenturyLink, who was the primary carrier in Washington State, was getting calls from PSAPs who didn't know what was going on. So like in any disaster, the poor situational awareness is a problem. The FCC should use its enforcement powers and then contractual relationship monitoring, which means that PSAPs and state 911 offices should monitor their contracts with their carriers. Again, that part of the report, the FCC report, is like one page. It's not very detailed. So this is a picture of a fluke. My personal opinion, this is a fluke. It's a very unique set of circumstances that occurred with a software counter. But the real problem is, with all the software we've got involved with 911, what other flukes are out there waiting to get us? This particular one undoubtedly won't recur, especially now that everyone's onto it. But what other software glitches, especially as we implement next generation 911, are waiting for us? This is a link to the FCC report as well as my contact information. Again, thanks for the chance to talk to you this morning. I hope this was helpful.
Questions or discussions?
Bill, thank you very much for the presentation. I had a couple of quick questions, and I read the report as well. What steps has the state of Washington done in their relationship with CenturyLink to address the apparent lack of transparency post-incident that occurred to ensure that you get the information to find out what the root cause was if something like this ever occurred again?
We haven't done anything officially contractually. We have informally talked to CenturyLink and set up a better connection or contact system, specifically between CenturyLink and the state E911 office. Now, the state E911 office, which is housed at our Emergency Operations Center, actually was notified. The on-call EOC officer was notified at 2:30 in the morning and did get on this and notify PSAPs in Washington State. But that's what we've done informally. However, we are in the process right now of issuing a new RFP for an ESI net. Our existing ESI net contract expires next year, 2015. So we're going to issue a new RFP for an ESI net, and that'll contain stronger provisions for notification. Haven't decided exactly what those are yet, but notification and this situational awareness that we're talking about.
I was going to ask, from the CIO perspective, and just looking at how complex these systems are getting in the future, and as we look towards going to next gen 911, from the perspective of identifying potential software errors, did you identify or see any, or have any recommendations as it comes to either testing or putting procedures in place or establishing requirements so that things don't end up at low-level alarms that no one knows about that's multiplied by the bad communication?
Boy, that is a great question. And the short answer to it is I don't have any specific recommendations at this time. I think it's important obviously to have a competitive environment for this, to have multiple vendors that you can choose from when you're buying next generation 911 equipment. Because competition always engenders better software. But I don't know how, at this point, we as 911 center directors, PSAP managers, emergency operations folks can hold our vendors more accountable. Great question.
I have a question on redundancy. Is there redundancy built in since then or before this happened that they could switch this system over to a different system, a redundant system running simultaneously? Is that a part of any of this or discussions?
You know, I don't know. So the question is will there be a provision to be able to switch, if 911 fails again, to be able to switch over to a backup or a redundant system? Is that it?
Right, and have parallel software running or an ability to come off of the affected system and maybe have a redundant way of transferring these calls and staying live?
So my understanding is that this software system within Toronto is really old, like decades old. And obviously it's been patched and updated since then. They actually had, and again, this is my understanding, I don't think this is in the FCC report, what they actually did with these counters is they did a reset, kind of a manual reset every few weeks. And that was one of the things that was missed. They had not done the manual reset on the counters. No one knew that there hadn't been a manual reset, and therefore the counters maxed out at 40 million. But what that tells you is that the software is old. Again, I don't know that I have any idea of how we could build more redundancy into the system, except to say that the software that we'll buy in the next contract will, especially for next generation 911, will not include this legacy.
A question for you. Thank you for your presentation. Can you comment a little bit about during the outage what steps were taken by either local PSAPs, the counties, state, about notifying the public that there was an outage and and how they were aware that they couldn't dial 911?
Yes. So what most PSAPs did is so first of all, they did contact the state 911 office, and like I said, there was a state EOC officer who was actually on call and managed the situation from an EOC perspective. Most PSAPs contacted their local media. So those of us who woke up that morning saw broadcasts on TV stations, broadcasts on radio stations, and those included the 10-digit numbers for people to call until 911 was restored. And unfortunately, some of those broadcasts went on even after 911 had been restored. And what you saw on the TV station was, if you live in Snohomish County, call this 10-digit number. If you live in King County, call this 10-digit number. It wasn't very clean. So anyway, PSAPs worked their traditional media contacts to make that happen. I think that this, and again, speaking as a CIO, I think that this is a call to action to create 311. You all know what 311 is, right? The non-emergency number. And 311's been implemented in a spotty fashion across the country, mostly in larger cities. New York City, Los Angeles has got 311, for example. I think San Francisco does. Does Sacramento?
Yes.
Sacramento's got 311. But the advantage of 311 is that if there's a 911 outage, at least somebody they've got a number that they can call, which hopefully would work. And I think there needs to be a kind of a national call for action to better create 311 rather than having these 10-digit numbers which need to be called.
Any other questions?
Just offer to you that it's a Pandora's box if you open 311 to that, keeping in mind what the potential staffing and need for an infrastructure is. I appreciate you sharing this with us. You said that it was very old software. What was the age in time on that?
I don't know. And as far as I know, that
10 years older?
My guess is that it's 1980s, 1990s vintage, but that's my guess. I think that information was pretty closely held by the vendor.
And then a couple things that came to my mind, not to get too long-armed, because without fail it will always come back and bite us. But I think that among the many things that have occurred in the last couple of years with the realignment of our 911 office under OES, I think that the lines of communication in OES's role is serving as a center for critical incidents in the state, that I think I would like to believe that in California we'd have a handle on the problem a lot faster at least that we have the outage. Maybe not the cure right away, as we discuss some of the nuances of that with our outage reports. But we do, as an advisory board, we do review the outage reports on a regular basis. We pour into them with great detail, and we are creating more and more analytics on them so that we can identify these things that are precursors to this type of an incident. So from a state standpoint, we're fortunate to have that under OES, and I think that that benefits us. I would offer just another view on this. I still think from a preparedness standpoint, first, your call to arms is appropriate, part of the state's planning, which I think they're already embarked upon, for catastrophic loss of systems, both from the state CIO and then from our 911 system, gets coordinated through OES, and that planning process is in place. I've long been a proponent of keeping your published 7-digit numbers at the forefront as a PSAP manager for many years. I think that there is a huge benefit to that. The bigger challenge is getting the communities to recognize that if you're going to maintain that 7-digit, then that's on the back of the local jurisdiction. And we got away from good, bad, or indifferent. We got away from funding it with Setna in the past to try and get everybody over to 911 system and taking cellular 911. But the appropriate place, and I think the one that has the most flexibility, is going to be the PSAPs in an emergency. I personally believe it would be much easier to staff up a 911 center to take additional 7-digit calls than it would be to try and cross-train and build in the expansion capabilities of a 311 center for those rare times when those emergencies occur. It's just an opinion. But I appreciate the presentation. I think it's very thought-provoking and certainly gives us a springboard for things for us to look at also.
You know, that's a great point, Chief. I'm not sure, I haven't conducted a detailed study of the 311 systems that are in operation, but in many cases, cities or counties might actually use their PSAPs, their call takers at PSAPs to actually staff 311. The ones I'm familiar with, that's not the case. It is a separate function. But it is a model that potentially could be used since all PSAPs have non-emergency numbers anyway. It's a good point.
Bill, from reading the report, it looks like that actually there was redundancy in place, and they could have switched all those calls over to the Miami selective router, and the outage would have been minimal. So it really was a case of bad communication. The alarms didn't work at the level they should have, and then diagnosing the problem and the protocols that were in place internally to switch those calls over. Is that correct?
That is correct. And as a matter of fact, that was the immediate action by Entrado. I failed to mention that, but once they figured out that Miami, the calls being routed through Miami were working, and the calls being routed through Inglewood weren't, they switched every PSAP over to Miami until they could figure out what was going on in Inglewood. So that's exactly what they did, sir.
One of the things that we found really disturbing in California is we didn't know there was an outage. We would normally wait for our Verizon or AT&T to let us know of an outage. They weren't notified of the outage. So we didn't know of the outage till, I want to say, a day or two later. There was no reporting mechanism to the PSAPs of the outage from Entrado. I don't believe there was a reporting mechanism from Entrado to Verizon and AT&T. So this was a huge wake-up call to us as we're looking at these systems. And the 7 states, I've talked to several other states with this, and they're kind of grappling with the same type of issues, that they weren't alerted there was an outage. And I just think that is something we absolutely have to bridge that gap in California as we move to next gen. The other thing I learned through all of this, which we're going to have to work through, is that CPUC does not regulate VoIP calls. So our next gen 911 system is based on a VoIP call. We have regulations for wireless through the FCC and the CPUC, but there is no regulation in California through the CPUC for VoIP calls. So that was another thing that really came to light as a result of this outage. So we have a lot to do before we start moving down the road with 911 to make sure that we have a system that at least provides the same level of service that we have today.
And it sounds like that's going back to the contracts and accountability with the vendors and being able to monitor and notify whoever they need to notify immediately.
And to make sure
and
that
have
they're
some response
notified.
teams to deal with it.
Yeah, and that they have the same type of contract with their subcontractors in place so they're notified quickly. Definitely a wake-up call. Okay, with no further questions or comments, we'll move now to the next presentation, which is Bagley-King Act review.
Thank you, Karen. So my name is Alex Powell, and I'm a staff counsel here at Cal OES. And I'm going to do an overview of Bagley-Keene. I just kind of want to preface this by saying that Bagley-Keene is really, there are a lot of nuances within the law. So this is kind of an overview to hit the hot topics that typically come up. And especially when it comes to closed session meetings, there is a list of dozens of potential exceptions or justifications for having a closed session meeting, and we're not going to go into all of those today. So generally, the topics that come up are what constitutes a meeting, what types of communication can you and can you not engage in, committees and subcommittees and task forces that are part of the body itself, the state body, notice requirements, access and location. This typically comes in the next topic, which is teleconferencing, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Public comment, which came up briefly a few moments ago, that's an issue that comes up regularly. Voting, closed meetings, and then the most important part are violations, what happens when a state body or individuals act in violation of Bagley-Keene. So, what constitutes a meeting? A meeting is the congregation of a majority of the members of the council to hear, discuss, debate, or deliberate a topic that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of that council. Communication can be to clarify an issue that's within the council's jurisdiction. It can be to facilitate an agreement, a compromise, a casual conversation that could just advance a resolution of some issue that's come up, and really any aspect of the deliberative process. There is actually a section that talks about just receiving information as a group could lead to a violation of Bagley-Keene if it's discussed. So social gatherings, conferences, retreats, let me go back. So telephone conversations and emails. This is what's called a serial communication, where you have one member contacting another, who then contacts another, who then contacts another. Each individual contact is not a violation. In the aggregate, it is. Same thing with discussing a topic with an intermediary who's not on the board. But by virtue of that intermediary, you end up talking with a majority of the members. That constitutes a meeting, and that would be subject to Bagley-Keene. Beware the reply all button on an email. If you hit reply all and discuss something that would be in furtherance without the public's opportunity to view and comment, that could be a violation of Bagley-Keene. As I mentioned before, social gatherings, conferences, retreats, where a majority of the members are attending, avoid topics that are within the jurisdiction of the council. It sounds easier said than done, but this is where you can get into trouble. If you have out of 10, if you have 6 people together talking about something that's within the council's jurisdiction, that can give way to trouble. Subcommittees and task forces are subject to the Act. The law requires that a subcommittee or task force that is comprised of 3 or more members, that they have to comply with Bagley-Keene. So 2 or fewer do not have to, but once you have 3, you have to notice it and comply with the Act. A subcommittee or task force would be created by the action of the council itself, and it would contain a member of, at least a member of the council. And that typically you'll see with a task force. You may have 1 or 2 members of a council and then other people that are within the industry. So generally, all meetings are public. They have to be noticed 10 calendar days in advance. There are exceptions to that rule for emergency meetings and special meetings, and there are really narrow justifications for when you can hold an emergency meeting or where action needs to be taken immediately. The same thing goes for adding item to the agenda after the 10-day period has elapsed. And again, there is the very narrow justification where there needs to be immediate action taken on that topic, and it's come up after that 10th day before the meeting. In addition to the notice, the agenda must be distributed, and the agenda has to include all of the topics that will be discussed. It also has to include any session that would be closed, as was on your agenda today. You have to have the topic that was to be discussed and the specific statutory code section that allows for the closed session meeting. Additionally, any information or documents that are distributed to a majority of the members of the council have to be made available to the public who can attend the meeting. And any document that would be available under the Public Record Act would be available to the committee. For instance, if there's a document that's distributed to the council that's in a closed session that would not be subject to Public Record Act, then the public obviously does not have a right to that document, as long as that document, the scope of that document only pertains to the subject matter which is being discussed in a closed session. So again, very narrow exception there. And additionally, of course, there's no communication on any of the documents that you received prior to the meeting until that meeting has started. So location and access, right? The location has to be open to the public, or at least for the purposes of the meeting, open to the public. This can come into play when you have a teleconferencing situation. Teleconferencing is allowed under the Act, and I'll jump to the next slide. So you can teleconference. You can have multiple locations. The caveat is that each of those locations have to be available to the public. So you can appear at your house to appear at the meeting unless your house is open to the public. The law doesn't limit the amount of locations that need to be open. You can have each of the teleconference locations can be open, and you can have an additional viewing room for the public in the event that there's a space issue. But at a minimum, each of the locations where a voting board member is going to be appearing by has to be open to the public. And each location must be audible, ADA compliant. All voting must be done by roll call for those attending via teleconference. And all of the provisions of the Act apply in terms of notice, location, and accessibility. As we discussed earlier today, the public has an opportunity to comment on any agenda item before a vote. That comment can be made either before or during the topics or the conversation of that topic. The exception, of course, is if there's a closed session, there is no public's right to comment on that session. Additionally, the public is allowed to comment on topics that were not brought up. However, no action can be taken on anything that's raised by the public for the purposes of just informing the board. That would be tabled for the next meeting, and that could be added to an agenda should the board move to do so. It's not on the slide here, but additionally, the board has a right to regulate the length of time that the public can comment. That would be done by a vote by the board itself. And you can move to limit the amount of time, 2 minutes per topic or 2 minutes per person, as long as the public's given an ample opportunity to discuss their thoughts prior to the vote. So closed session meetings, again, there are a ton of exceptions. These are just kind of to show you how wide of a variety they are. You can have a closed session to discuss any disciplinary matters under the Admin Procedures Act for state bodies or state agencies to deal with examinations. Pending litigation, of course, would be subject to a closed session. Appointment, employment, and dismissal of an executive officer. And there are other limited circumstances that you can hold closed session meetings. On some of them, you're required to post-session notify the legislative analyst that a closed session meeting was held and under what statutory exemption it was held under. And again, these are just a handful of what are many different topics that you can have a closed session meeting for. So what happens when there's a violation? The Attorney General, the District Attorney, and any interested person in the public has the right to bring action in a court of law to enforce Bagley-Keene. Obviously, the District Attorney can bring criminal action against the individual members of a board, and that's a really specific, egregious circumstances where that would happen. The law essentially requires that the individual who attended that meeting intended to deprive the public, they knew the public was entitled to that information, and notwithstanding that knowledge, they still engaged in a conversation without the public's input, and that could be a misdemeanor, and there could be fines and jail time associated with that. Typically what happens in litigation that involves Bagley-Keene is the court orders an injunction to stop discussing something in closed session, and they can award attorney's fees and costs to the individual who brought that action. So recently, in LA County, the LA Times sued the LA Memorial Coliseum Commission. For those who don't know, the LA Memorial Coliseum is where the USC football team plays. It's a publicly held facility, and it's rented out for lots of things. One of the narrow exceptions that the commission was able to meet on were lease negotiations. However, in that session, they discussed event planning, how many free tickets members would get to football games, who was entitled to the free tickets, obviously things that wouldn't be subject to closed session. So the judge came down with a harsh ruling. He said that they essentially drove a Mack truck through what is otherwise a narrow exception, and he awarded the LA Times attorney's fees and costs. He issued an injunction to restrict what meetings could be discussed in a closed session, and he ordered that the commission record and archive every closed meeting session for 3 years. So essentially, they're going to be under the microscope now as a result of that. And this is just one example of many. This wasn't under Bagley-Keene. This was actually under the Brown Act. The Brown Act and Bagley-Keene are almost mirror images of each other. Bagley-Keene applies to state bodies. Brown Act applies to local legislative bodies. So that's where they fell. So again, it's something that you always err on the side of caution and make sure that you limit your discussions in a closed session to those narrow exceptions that are enumerated in statute. Because there's an attorney in the room, I have to advise you that this was not intended to be legal advice, and that always contact your local counsel for liability and risks that associate with your own actions. And my contact info is up there, and with that, I end my presentation. If there are any questions, I'm happy to see if I can answer them.
Any questions? Comments? Okay, thank you very much, Alex. And we wanted to do that because we have several board members, and it's been about 3 years since we've been briefed on Bagley-Keene. So thank you very much. Okay, moving to the next item. It's new business. The LRPC work group, next steps, and that's with the 911 Advisory Board. We can pen this till the next meeting, or is there discussion today? Okay, we can move this to the next meeting. And then agenda items for future meetings. Text to 911, there'll be a full-blown presentation on that. And then I also heard that possibly we need to be talking about the county coordinators and looking at workload for county coordinators, and we should have that as a presentation as well, is what I feel like, to make sure that we address those issues.
And we're going to continue to have the wireless location accuracy on the agenda.
That will remain as a standing item. Now, it will stay under unfinished business until it's finished.
Karen, I also have, I don't know if it's for the next meeting or a future meeting, but in light of the discussion today about wireless accuracy and the discussion that's going on between the consensus agreement between APCO and NENA, is there any discussion at the state level about having the state take a position in rendering some sort of a letter to the FCC on California's behalf to discuss some of the issues that come out of that agreement?
Okay. We can put that on the advisory, on the agenda for next time, and if there's any action by the state prior to that, we will convene a quick meeting with the board. We really need to dive in and take a look at that since it was just released.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other items for the next board meeting? Okay, any additional announcements?
I do. First, in my exuberance to write notes and everything, I want the record to reflect that my vote on the motion, the three-part motion, was an aye, not a nay, and I voiced it as nay. It was an aye, so I apologize for that. The next thing, I think most of you know that I've served on this committee for 9.5 years as a representative to the Police Chiefs Association, and I've enjoyed doing that. My challenge about a year ago was helping to finding Mike Langston as a great addition to our board. I was actually involved in the work on the original Senate Bill 911 that created this committee, having no idea at that time that I'd end up being tapped by then Governor Schwarzenegger and then reappointed by Governor Brown. And I've enjoyed my time on the committee, but this will probably be my last meeting on behalf of Cal Chiefs. I've spoke for the last year with Chief Boyd, who's the sitting president, of my desire to back away from some of the extracurricular things I'm doing so that I can devote more time to family and my consulting business, which in the interest of avoiding any conflicts of interest, I've shied away from an awful lot of money. So I'm going to be looking to do those things. I know that Director Gertolucci was very, very gracious in his support of my reappointment to this position, and I'm grateful for that. I've had a great working relationship with everybody that's up here. I'm honored to have served with you, but more importantly, proud of the work that this advisory board does. I think that there's been a tremendous amount accomplished, especially since the change in leadership with Karen coming on board. I know that there's a whole lot more to be done, especially in light of those things that we've talked about today. I anticipate that Cal Chiefs will have a recommendation to the governor, I hope, before the end of the year. If that's done and it makes it through its appointment process, I would anticipate the possibility of a new person sitting in this seat by the next meeting. If it doesn't occur, I'll leave that to the Cal Chiefs president as to his decision as to what we do with that. But I want to thank everybody for the camaraderie and for the wonderful work you do for the 911 community. That's it.
And Sam, I'd just like to personally thank you for everything that you've contributed to the board. Without your questions and really pursuing some of the issues, I don't think we would have made the progress that we've made today. You've been a real champion to 911, and you will be absolutely missed.
Thank you.
Karen, I'd like to add, too, I'm glad that CPCA has two representatives because it's going to take two of us to even remotely fill Sam's shoes. He's done a great job, and it's truly appreciated. Thank you, Sam.
I'd like to echo that sentiment as well. Chief Spiegel has been a real leader in the 911 arena and has been engaged in all of the issues and has an in-depth understanding of 911 and the issues that confront us, and he'll be sorely missed on this board.
On behalf of the California Fire Chiefs, we really appreciate Sam's work always reaching across a different kind of aisle than typically exists in politics. And in truly doing what's in the best interest of the public that we serve. His work with 911 is second to none, and we appreciate everything that you've done. Thank you, Sam.
I'd just like to echo the same thing on behalf of the department. I've worked with Sam for many years in different roles, and just thank you for what you bring. Thank you for your service, and as everybody said, you will be missed. Thank you.
And I'll echo that, and thank you for being here as one of the first long-standing members with me. I'm going to miss you, and Sheriff Bonner as well when he's here, but you're going to really be missed.
Well, I agree on behalf of Sheriff Bonner and I'm sure the CSSA. Thank you very much, Sam, for all you've done over the years. And Sheriff Bonner, between me being here to represent him, typically feels okay missing a meeting from time to time, but also mentions you and knows that the good work that you're doing allows him to miss a meeting or two. So I'm going to text him.
I know the inside on that comment.
I'm going to text him right after this meeting to let him know you may not be here anymore. Thank you very much.
Sam, I do want to say thank you. This is the first time that I've actually spoken. This is like the 5th meeting that I've gone to. So it's taken you to leave for me to say something. But I do want to say I appreciate the time that you took to help me to understand the role of this organization and what is tasked with this organization. You are going to be missed. I enjoy listening to you. You bring to the forefront very thought-provoking issues that this committee needs to look at. So thank you so much, and I do cherish our friendship, so thank you for what you've done. And on behalf of CSSA, thank you.
Sam, we spent a lot of time on 1717 this last year and got to know each other pretty well. And on behalf of APCO, we thank you for your service.
And I'll be the last to say thank you. You've done a lot for me in educating me on some of the history and current issues, but I'll miss you. But I know you're not, I can find you. I know where to get a hold of you. So it won't be the last time we see you, I hope.
Thank you all very much. Very kind.
Thank you, everyone. Is there any additional public comments today? With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.